The cashmere scarf felt like a noose around Eleanor Vance's throat as she stood in the kitchen of her Greenwich estate, watching the coffee machine finish its cycle. It was 6 in the morning, and the house was silent except for the soft hum of the heating system kicking on. She poured herself a cup, black, no sugar, the way she had learned to drink it over 15 years of being the wife of Jonathan Pierce, a man who built a billion-dollar private equity firm on the backs of handshake deals and ruthless charm. The phone on the counter buzzed, Jonathan's phone. He had left it there the night before after a late meeting, a rare oversight for a man who controlled every detail of his life like a chess grandmaster. Eleanor usually never touched it, but the buzz was insistent. 3 rapid notifications that lit up the screen without the passcode. The preview of the first message was enough to stop her breath. It was from a contact saved as Amber Collins, and the text read, "Last night was perfect. I can still smell you on my pillow. Can't wait for tonight." Eleanor did not cry. She did not scream. She placed the coffee cup down with a steady hand, picked up the phone, and walked to her study. She closed the door behind her and sat in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. She read every message in the thread. There were hundreds of them, dating back almost 2 years. They talked about trips to Aspen, dinners at the plaza, and a future that did not include her. Jonathan called Amber his fresh start and referred to Eleanor as the old guard. He said he was just waiting for the right moment to restructure his personal life. Eleanor took screenshots of everything and sent them to her own number. Then she placed the phone back exactly where she found it and returned to her coffee. When Jonathan came down an hour later, freshly shaved and smelling of expensive cologne, he kissed her forehead with practiced indifference and dropped his leather satchel by the island. "Big day today," he said, adjusting his cufflinks without meeting her eyes. "The foundation gala tonight. I need you to play hostess. Smile, shake hands, make me look good." He poured a glass of orange juice and laughed under his breath. "Amber's coming as a junior consultant. Try not to embarrass her with the old guard routine." Eleanor noted the name and the slight filing both away as she reached for the coffee pot. "The caterers arrive at 4, she said, already calculating which guest list column would seat Amber closest to the press. "Of course," Eleanor said, her voice flat but warm enough not to raise suspicion. "I'll wear the blue gown." "Perfect," he said, and he was out the door. Eleanor had never been the silent type. She had graduated with honors from Columbia, with a degree in finance, but when her father, the founder of Pierce Capital, passed away suddenly, the board had handed the reins to Jonathan, the charismatic son-in-law. Eleanor had stepped back to raise their 2 children and manage the household, a role she accepted because she trusted the man she married. That trust was now a smoking crater. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor became a ghost in her own life. She hired a forensic accountant through a discreet firm in Boston who reported a monthly drain of retainer fees into an unlisted account. She met with a private investigator in a coffee shop in White Plains and paid him in cash from a personal savings she had kept separate for a decade. She followed Jonathan to a weekend conference in Chicago and watched from the hotel lobby bar as he checked in with Amber, a blonde woman in her mid-20s who wore a trench coat and nothing underneath, if the way Jonathan looked at her was any indication. Eleanor filmed everything with a pen camera her investigator supplied. She documented every hotel receipt, every wire transfer to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, every lie about late meetings and board dinners. One wire bore Martin Reeves's firm address as the origin note. The evidence piled up in a fireproof safe hidden behind a bookshelf in her study, and she copied the files to an encrypted drive she locked in her glove compartment. But the deepest truth Eleanor uncovered was the one her father had entrusted to her years ago in a conversation she had almost forgotten. When he was sick, he had called her to his bedside and handed her a key. "This is for a safe deposit box at Citibank on Fifth Avenue," he had said. "Inside, you'll find the original trust documents for Pierce Capital. I never transferred control to Jonathan. I left it in your name, Eleanor. I know you've stepped back, but I also know you see things he doesn't. If you ever need to, you can pull the trigger. It's all yours, the whole company." At the time, Eleanor had dismissed it as a sick man's sentiment. She never even opened the box. Now she called the bank and made an appointment. The documents were real. Every share of voting stock was in her name, not pledged, not shared, not contingent on her marriage. Jonathan was the CEO, the face of the company, the man the world feared and admired. But the notary's stamp from 2009 confirmed her sole control. Eleanor called Diana Hayes, a corporate attorney her father had once quietly recommended, and Hayes confirmed the filings were never amended. But legally, he was a tenant in a building she owned. He did not know. He had never asked because the board minutes she later pulled showed he had waived an ownership review to save time the year he took over. The foundation gala was held at the Museum of Modern Art. 300 of the wealthiest people in New York attended. The room glittered with diamonds and champagne flutes. Jonathan stood at the podium, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, his arm around Eleanor, who wore the blue gown he had requested. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. Amber was in the room, posing as a junior partner from a consulting firm, dressed in red, her eyes fixed on Jonathan with the hunger of someone who smelled a promotion. Jonathan tapped his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight to support the Pierce Foundation for Children's Education. But before I get into our achievements, I want to make a toast to the woman who has stood by me through this entire journey, my wife, Eleanor." The room applauded. Eleanor smiled. She clapped along, but she did not raise her glass. "And," Jonathan continued, "I also want to welcome a new addition to our executive team, Amber Collins, who has been instrumental in our recent expansion. Amber, stand up." Amber rose, radiant, and the room applauded again. Eleanor watched it all with a stillness that bordered on supernatural. Then she stepped forward, her hand closing around the microphone. "Thank you, Jonathan," she said, her voice soft but carrying. "You're always so generous with your words, but tonight I think it's time I shared a toast of my own." She looked at the crowd, her eyes landing on the financiers, the journalists, the old friends of her father. "My father founded Pierce Capital with a handshake and a promise that integrity would always outrank profit. He believed that the structure of a company should be transparent as glass. But glass can also crack. And when it does, the truth falls out." Jonathan's smile froze. He reached for the microphone. "Eleanor, this isn't the time. This is the only time," she said, and she pressed a button on the remote in her hand. Behind her, the massive projection screen that had been displaying the foundation's accomplishments flickered. Suddenly, it showed a photograph of Jonathan and Amber kissing in a hotel corridor. The room gasped. Then, another photograph of a wire transfer for $2 million to a shell company Amber controlled. Then the text messages, blown up to cinematic size, every lie and every promise to leave his wife. The silence that fell over the museum was so dense you could hear the ice melting in the champagne flutes. Jonathan's face went white. Amber tried to shrink into her chair, but the eyes of the room were on her like searchlights. Eleanor turned to Jonathan. "You built this empire on your name, but an empire without a foundation is just a sandcastle. And I," she said, pulling a document from her clutch and holding it up, "am the foundation. Every voting share of this company was left in my name by my father. You have been the CEO, the face, the king, but you were never the owner. You were the manager, and you have just been fired." Jonathan lunged for the microphone, but the security team hired by Eleanor's lawyer stepped forward before he could reach her. 2 guards flanked him. Amber was already walking out, her heels clicking a fast retreat toward the exit. She did not look back. The confrontation the next morning took place in a glass-walled conference room at Pierce Capital's headquarters in Midtown. Jonathan's lawyer, Martin Reeves, a man with silver hair and a reputation for shredding opponents, sat across from Eleanor and her attorney, a sharp woman named Diana Hayes. Martin placed a thick folder on the table and leaned back with practiced arrogance. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'm going to be direct. This little stunt at the gala has embarrassed my client, but it has not changed the legal reality. Jonathan has run this company for 10 years. The board supports him. Your father's trust is old and vulnerable to challenge. We will tie this up in court for a decade. You will run out of money before we run out of appeals." Eleanor did not react. She opened her own folder, a slim blue portfolio, and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Mr. Reeves, the audit trail in that document connects the Cayman Islands account to your personal LLC, the same account that funded Amber's apartment on the Upper East Side. You signed off on the wire transfer yourself." Martin's face drained of color. He looked at the paper, then at Jonathan, then back at the paper. His hand trembled slightly. "I am not here to negotiate," Eleanor continued, her voice quiet. "I am here to give you a choice. Jonathan leaves with the clothes on his back and the car in his name. He signs over all claims to the company, the Manhattan penthouse, the Hamptons property, and he walks away without a severance. You, Mr. Reeves, will resign from the bar voluntarily, or I will forward this file to the disciplinary committee by noon. You have 30 seconds to decide." Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do this. I built this company. I made the fortune your family lives on." Eleanor looked at him with a calm that was more devastating than any scream. "You maintained it, but you never owned it. There is a difference between a steward and a thief. You crossed that line the first time you moved money into a secret account. You have 30 seconds. Martin Reeves crumbled first. He mumbled something about retirement and left the room without shaking anyone's hand. Jonathan sat in his chair, his empire crumbling around him, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He signed the papers with a shaking hand. In the months that followed, the company was restructured. Eleanor took the CEO seat herself, something the board accepted with surprising speed, given that she owned a controlling interest. She sold the private equity arm and used the proceeds to endow the Vance Foundation for women's economic independence. She named her daughter as a board member. She ensured that every contract in the company's future would be transparent and auditable. Jonathan's descent was swift. Without access to the company's capital, his creditors closed in. He lost the penthouse, the cars, the country club membership. Amber disappeared within a week, taking what cash she could salvage and leaving him with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills. The circles that had once celebrated him now refused to return his calls. He was a pariah in the world he had dominated. 5 years passed. The Vance Foundation had grown into one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the country, with programs in 40 states and a reputation for cutting through bureaucracy. Eleanor was a keynote speaker at conferences, a sought-after voice on economic equity. She had grayed at the temples and carried herself with a stillness that spoke of peace, not bitterness. One cold November evening, Eleanor was leaving a charity dinner at the Waldorf Astoria. The street was slick with rain. Her driver held the door of the black sedan as she prepared to step inside. Across the street, a man was loading boxes into a delivery truck. He wore a stained coat and work boots. His hands were raw. He turned, and the streetlight caught his face. It was Jonathan. He looked old. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. He saw her at the same moment. He froze, a cardboard box half lifted. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the rain seemed to fall in silence. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out except a puff of cold breath. Eleanor did not smirk. She did not feel triumph. She felt only a quiet finality, like closing a book that had kept her up too many nights. She gave him a single nod, a nod that meant nothing and everything. It meant, "I see you, and I am done." She stepped into the car. The door closed with a solid thunk. The engine hummed to life and the sedan pulled away into the wet city night. Jonathan stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights fade until they disappeared around a corner. He realized in that moment that he had not just lost a company or a fortune. He had lost the one person who had ever truly seen him as something more than a transaction, and that loss could never be clawed back. In the back seat of the car, Eleanor looked down at the vintage brooch pinned to her lapel. It had been her grandmother's, a small thing of sapphire and silver that she had worn to every major event of her life. She touched it with her fingertips and felt the cool metal grounding her. She had not destroyed Jonathan. She had simply removed him from the equation of her life. And in doing so, she had found something far more valuable than any fortune. She had found her own authority, earned by silence, observation, and the courage to wait. The rain streaked down the window and the lights of New York blurred into a river of gold and red. She was not home yet, but she had already arrived.